Okay. Well, I am going to get started. And if other people pop in, cool. Okay. So welcome, Marjorie. You're here for the nutrition and mental health um, webinar, and so I'm going to display some things on the screen here in just a couple minutes. I am a note taker personally, so you're welcome to take notes, but you'll also receive a wrap-up email tomorrow with a link to replay the webinar so you can watch it as many times as you need to. You're also welcome to raise your hand and ask questions. I see that you put in a chat. I see. So your audio and video are not working. That's okay. If you manage to get them to work, you are welcome to jump on here. So, um, and I'll just try to keep this chat open just so that I can see if you have anything else to say. So let's get started. Let me just move my windows around so I can see a little bit better, and we'll share the screen. Okay. Now, Marjorie, are you able to tell me if you can see the screen that says nutrition and mental health? Make sure you can see what I'm sharing. All right. So a little bit, wonderful. Okay. A little bit about who I am. I don't believe, Marjorie, that you and I have met. So a little bit more about me. I live in Seattle. My office is based in Burien. I've lived here with my husband for about 7 or 8 years now, but we've been married for over 20. As a person, I enjoy baking, roller skating. I enjoy sitting around a fire with some wine with friends. I actually really like to do yard work in small doses. And I have a pet hedgehog named Dr. Pickles, who is a real hoot. My professional background. So I've been practicing nutrition for about 5 or 6 years. Privately, I've been practicing for just over three. But my background is in physical medicine mostly. So I've been working with integrative practices, multidisciplinary practices that help with chronic pain and offer more intensive treatments. So they're combining, things like nutrition and anti-inflammatory agents with physical modalities that help people to overcome pain. My own healing is really what inspired me to study nutrition officially. And so, it's really a combination between that and then working with people who were dealing with these chronic inflammatory issues. Really brought me to the place where I wanted to study it officially and to help more people. And as far as my own health story, I won't get too much into detail with that, but basically I had PCOS and everything that entails. For the most part, is in addition to some other things like migraines and things like that. And over time, I've been able to, in the beginning, it was just me doing my own amateur research to try to correct those issues. And I was making progress. And then as I started studying nutrition officially, then that sort of brought to my attention some more details that I was missing. It also confirmed some of my suspicions. And now I'm able to do a bit better for myself and for others knowing those things formally. So I got my nutritional therapy practitioner in 2020. Um, I launched Well Roots in 2021. I passed the board exam to become board certified in holistic nutrition in 2022 and officially completed all of the hours to get that in 2023. So I help female bodied individuals to learn to recognize and trust their body's unique health needs so they can grow intuition and find flexibility in their food choices without guilt, shame, or symptoms. That's really at the heart of what I'm doing. I'm looking for individual causes to their symptoms to help them get more long-term sustainable results as opposed to band-aid fixes and medications. So I work with one-on-one with clients to pinpoint the root causes of their symptoms and provide education resources to help them stop grasping at the band-aid fixes and address symptoms more effectively. I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement. I live and work on the traditional land of the First People of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. And I say this with all intention of growing awareness to the Native people of this land, but also to resources and education regarding how they're being affected today, currently because of our colonization. So I will be offering some resources in your wrap-up email after the webinar so that you can learn for yourself, especially if you live in the area. I would highly encourage you to use those links to educate yourself on that. All right, so nutrition is one modality among many for mental health. I am not a mental health therapist. I'm not a mental health counselor. I want to be clear about that. Nutrition is my expertise, and specifically holistic nutrition. So mental health is a part of this. And so what I'm going to do is share with you my knowledge from a nutritional perspective in regards to things that can support mood and mental well-being as a whole. Marjorie, do you want to put in the chat if there's any questions? Actually, I'll just say here, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, just throw them in the chat since we're having some issues with audio and video on coming from you. So I'd love to know if you have questions, and I'll try to pause now and then again, but if you have questions, just go ahead and put them in there. All right, so diet is not the only factor. So like I said, there's lots of modalities that are necessary to dealing with mental wellness, to treating it. And nutrition is not the only thing, and I'm not here to suggest that it's the way out of mental illness. It's truly not. But there are other modalities that you can seek out. EMDR is very effective, has been shown to be very effective for trauma, especially complex trauma, talk therapy, internal family systems, where we're talking about parts work, cognitive behavioral therapy, somatic work, which is body movement, essentially, craniosacral work, hypnotherapy, medications, breath work, meditation, nervous system regulation, play therapy, which I know is more common in working with children, but it's also useful for adults, and journaling. And I'm sure there are more. So those are just the ones that either I've used most of these for my own mental wellness, but those are the ones I'm more aware of. So the two most important things, in my opinion, that I would consider when addressing mental health are going to be understanding that it might take multiple types of modalities to see practice. So very often we can work with intellectual or logical cognitive sort of thinking, but also incorporating movement from the body and an understanding of how it shows up in the body. So sometimes it might take multiple modalities. Finding a qualified practitioner that you trust. This is really important for any practitioner that you work with. Sometimes that requires multiple consultations. The unfortunate piece is that it costs money every time you want to see somebody. But finding one that you really trust to work with and that you mesh well with is super important in finding quality mental health care, especially. I've heard, if you're familiar with the writer and speaker Gabor Mate, he's very well known in the holistic and mental health world. He talks about how people who have a better relationship with their therapist are the ones who actually make more progress. So I do think that it's really important to not just settle on a therapist, but I also understand the difficulties that come along with finding a therapist, having been someone who has gone through many to find the right person. All right, so let's get into the nutrition component. That's what you're here for. Um, Neurotransmitters. This is a big word. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers. They're a lot similar to hormones that impact mood, sleep, and digestion. So let's get into how nutrition impacts those. So diet and neurotransmitter production, they're similar to hormones, as I said. They're chemical messengers, primarily impact learning, mood, and digestion, and are derived from amino acids, which are known as the building blocks of protein. So when we eat protein, it actually gets broken down into amino acids, and then those amino acids are built into the types of proteins that we need throughout our bodies. And one of those things is neurotransmitters. So there's many types of neurotransmitters. The ones we're going to focus on tonight are going to be serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine, which are actually hormones. It's adrenaline and noradrenaline, and GABA, which is gamma aminobutyric acid. Those are the ones we're going to be focusing on tonight. I encourage you to do some research if you're interested in what other neurotransmitters there are. So speaking about serotonin, I think that's one that it's pretty common for us to hear. We hear that it impacts our mood. What we don't often hear is that it also impacts our digestion, which I'm just going to say as a side note because that's not really where we're going with the mental health topic. But it is derived from the amino acid tryptophan. Some people pronounce that tryptophan. Low levels have been associated with depression, and they are associated with gut motility and bladder function as well as mood. In fact, a lot of our serotonin is actually produced and exists in the gut itself, which is really interesting to me. So you might have a tryptophan deficiency if you tend to crave carbs in the afternoon, or if you suffer from depression or anxiety symptoms. The food sources of tryptophan are mainly going to be animal proteins. Those have the highest concentration of tryptophan. Something interesting to note is that tryptophan is involved in the Maillard process. If you've ever heard of that, it's kind of like if you're told to like brown meat, or if you use like a sugar glaze on something that's intended to like crust and brown, that's the Maillard effect. Tryptophan is required in that process. So meat that is browned is typically going to lose a lot of its tryptophan because tryptophan is needed for that browning process. So just something interesting to keep in mind. All right, we come to dopamine. So dopamine is derived from the amino acid tyrosine, which if you've done any thyroid work, you might have heard this mentioned in regards to your thyroid, but tyrosine is important for dopamine production. It's involved in reward, emotion, and learning. Low levels have been associated with depression, schizophrenia, and ADHD, along with epinephrine, which, like I said, is adrenaline, and norepinephrine. It falls under the category of what's called catecholamines, which are all derived from tyrosine. Symptoms of tyrosine deficiency would be craving sweets to boost energy. So if you're feeling that kind of like low energy mood and you're like, oh, if I just have like a piece of chocolate, I'll pick right back up again. That's a tyrosine or potential tyrosine deficiency. If you notice a pattern of that. And the need to get coffee to get going in the morning. So you just can't wake up until you get that first cup of coffee. You feel tired, unfocused. And again, we're talking about patterns when we're looking at symptoms of deficiencies. We're not talking about that every once in a while you feel like that. We're talking about a couple, 2-3 times more than that a week. Food sources of tyrosine are going to be soybeans, so like tofu or natto. It's a Japanese fermented soybean. Eggs and salmon are good sources of tyrosine. GABA, this is actually one of my favorite ones. It's a calming transmitter, and there's a little bit more complexity to this one. So it is derived from the amino acid glutamine. Glutamine first converts into glutamate, which is a neurotransmitter. And because it doesn't have a lot to do with mood, I didn't cover it very much here, but glutamine first turns into glutamate. And then if it has the right cofactors, it will turn to GABA. So GABA is known for calming the nervous system. I especially use it in clients who have trouble calming their thoughts, like especially if it's like bedtime and their brain is racing. GABA is a really great quick fix for that, but recognizing that that could also be a symptom that you may not be converting glutamate to GABA very well. You're not getting enough glutamine. You know, there's multiple reasons for that, but for some reason you're not getting enough GABA. But GABA is an easy supplemental fix in those moments as well. It's known to improve symptoms of epilepsy, anxiety, and insomnia as well, which is really interesting. The insomnia piece makes sense based on what I just said, but epilepsy and anxiety were pretty interesting research to read. So symptoms of GABA deficiency would be overeating, so eating for the sake of comfort. You're just feeling kind of like down about things or racing, or you're just feeling really kind of overwhelmed with something that's happening and you turn to food for comfort in those moments. That could be a sign of GABA deficiency, or even feeling anxious or stressed. Food sources of glutamine, and again, you also need cofactors to convert that completely into GABA, and I'll go over those in a minute. But food sources of glutamine are going to be wild caught fish and seafood, red cabbage, cow's milk and dairy products, and eggs. Now, the main nutrients that are needed, there's multiple nutrients that are needed to convert glutamate to GABA. But two of the main ones that I would probably suggest are going to be magnesium and B6. So magnesium and vitamin B6 are essential to that conversion to GABA. I'm going to take a little water break here. All right, so wrapping up neurotransmitters. We want to focus on getting high quality proteins in the diet on a daily basis. That's what's going to support neurotransmitter production over time. However, for many nutrient deficiencies, you're going to find that supplements are an important part of that in order to sort of catch up the body until we get to more of a maintenance level. So we need to get to a more functional level of the said nutrient before we can start to just maintain it. It is very difficult to get as much protein in our diet as we need for optimal function for neurotransmitter production. So supplementation is often recommended. The second thing we need to look at is digestive health. So if we're not digesting and breaking down foods properly, we're not absorbing the nutrients that we need to create things like neurotransmitters or support whatever it is, digestion or liver detox. You know, we need to be able to break down those foods in order to absorb nutrients properly. So it's important to consider both of those things when we're looking at diet and neurotransmitter. So I'm also going to provide some links in your wrap-up email for supplement recommendations for this, as well as a digestion guide that helps people to troubleshoot their own digestion and figure out if everything's running optimally, or if maybe you need a little bit of support. That guide can help some people get past a few speed bumps pretty effectively. All right, anything coming up for you so far, Marjorie? I'm going to move on, but I will look at your chat to see if anything comes up for you. So talking about digestion and the importance of breaking down nutrients, let's go over a little bit of what that looks like. So this is where digestion is related to mental health, has to do with not only your nervous system, but also how we break down nutrients to use them for mood regulating piece components. And I see that you said, so a vegetarian needs to rely on supplements since they don't eat animal protein. Yes, essentially. There's very little resources that I found of tryptophan food sources other than animal protein. There's going to be probably tryptophan in plant-based foods, but you're going to have to eat mountains of them, which is actually the case for many plant-based eaters. It's difficult to get the amount of nutrition that you need, especially when it comes to nutrients that are going to be more highly concentrated in animal protein. So yes, I would say that that's probably true. All right, digestion 101. We're going to learn and go back to health class, junior high here. If you learned this, I actually didn't learn this in school, so it's kind of interesting. Or if I did, I have forgotten it. So the most important factor to remember about digestion is that it works from north to south, and anything that's going wrong on the north end is going to impact things on the south end. And eventually, these little symptoms show up here and there, they're going to turn into big factors on the end. So remembering that north to south, the brain, the nervous system, the chewing, and we'll get to all of these things, but all of those are going to affect things like your bowel movements or gas or bloating, things like that. So let's talk about it. So we go north to south. It begins in the brain. So just the preparing of your food, the smelling of your food, the looking at your food, even when you're like at the farmer's market and you're shopping for food to make dinner that night, that is actually your brain starting to switch from that sympathetic or what's called fight or flight response. That's an an autonomic nervous system response. That's your fight or flight. And we need to be in rest and digest, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. When we're in fight or flight, we're inhibiting digestive processes because our body is preparing to flee a tiger or fight a tiger. When we're in rest and digest, that's when digestive juices flow. That's when motility is working. That's when we're producing enough stomach acid. All of those components are necessary to digesting food. All right, so your mouth chewing adequately, and we'll talk about what that looks like later, begins the process of enzyme production and the production of HCl, which is hydrochloric acid, or it's known as stomach acid. So when you hear me say HCl, we're talking about stomach acid. So there are some salivary enzymes that are produced while you're chewing, lipase and amylase. They break down fats and carbohydrates. And then chewing is also mechanical digestion. So we have chemical digestion with enzymes and mechanical digestion using movement and motility. And not only that, when you're chewing, your brain starts to recognize what types of foods are being ingested and has the ability to communicate with the rest of your digestive system, say, hey, proteins are coming. We need to work to break these down. So that's an important part of digestion, is just chewing your food enough. Stomach involves more mechanical churning. There's smooth muscle within the stomach that starts to contract and starts to literally like knead the food and starts to break it down mechanically. More HCl is released, which is necessary to disinfect food. Stimulates what's called pepsinogen, which is the enzyme to break down proteins, part of the chemical digestion process. And then once the contents of your stomach reach a certain acidity, so they actually have to get to a high acidity, low on the pH scale, in order to move to the next step. If that doesn't happen, that's where things like heartburn and indigestion can occur. But what happens is it has to reach a pH of about 1.5 to 3.5, depending on the person. Once that happens, then what's called the pyloric sphincter, so the opening that goes from the stomach into the precursor to the small intestine, which is called the duodenum, that opens and allows the food to empty out of the stomach and into your small intestines. That duodenum is kind of the small factor between the stomach and the small intestine. That's where the acid is neutralized before it gets put into the small intestine. So it has to reach a certain level of acidity to protect us from pathogens. And then it also has to be neutralized so that we don't damage the rest of our digestive system. So then the small intestine, more mechanical churning, so more smooth muscle contraction that mechanically churns and continues to break down food. Most of the nutrients are absorbed through the wall of the small intestine into the bloodstream. So all of your micronutrients, your vitamins, some of your fatty acids, your minerals, all of that goes through the walls of the small intestine. Um, it's absorbed through little finger-like protrusions throughout the lining of the small intestine that are called microvilli. And that is how it gets absorbed into your bloodstream. So large intestine is where we go next. The remaining fats and water are absorbed through the wall of the large intestine. Fiber, which is undigestible, is necessary in the large intestine because what happens is it ferments. And what that means is the good bacteria that live in your large intestine, they feed off of that fiber and they produce short chain fatty acids, which are meant to protect the mucosal lining of the digestive tract. So we need those fibers in order to basically increase our intestinal immune system. And then everything that is not fermented or digested in some form is eliminated through waste. So in summary, if digestion is not working properly, if digestion is not working properly, the body can't absorb the nutrients to create neurotransmitters, support the immune system, support liver detox, all of that good stuff. So that is where like digestion in and of itself is essential to getting to the point where we can support our mental health through nutrition. So coming back to it, it impacts nutrient absorption and also sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous responses is also something that can have the ability to regulate mood and how we're reacting to things. Supporting healthy digestion. So here's what I was talking about. Oh, there you are. I see you now. Oh, we have someone new who joined. That's what it is. Okay. Hi, welcome. All right. So supporting healthy digestion. There's a few things that we can do to switch from that sympathetic nervous response into our rest and digest response. The first thing that I recommend to clients is deep breathing before meals. So I'll have them have a seat and for about 1 minute, they do some deep breathing techniques and there's lots of breathing techniques out there that are effective at doing this. The one I like to teach is very simple. It's called a box breathing technique. You might have heard of it. And the reason why, how you can remember it is a box has essentially like 4 sides. And what you're doing is taking a breath for 4 seconds, holding for 4 seconds, and then releasing for 4 seconds. And we keep doing this box for about a minute. I will put instructions for that in your wrap-up email. Make a note for myself so I remember. So deep breathing before meals is an effective way of switching back into that parasympathetic response. Sitting down to eat. So you might have heard standing is better for your digestion. And it's not that that's not true. When we stand when we eat, what we're tending to do is we're tending to multitask. And that's where the sympathetic nervous system is activated. And so I recommend sitting. Recommend sitting at a dedicated place to have a meal. So at a dinner table, a breakfast nook, a counter, a park bench, something to tell your brain, like, this is meal time. This is what we're doing. We're getting ready to digest foods. So that's why I recommend sitting to eat. Now, if you're confident that you can avoid multitasking while you are standing, then I say go ahead and stand. I get that question quite a bit. Chewing. There's no magic number for how many times you should chew your food. You might have heard like, oh, you need to chew it 35 times or you need to chew it 25 times. There's no magic number because every food is different. The 2 rules that I like to tell people is chew until your food becomes a smoothie-like consistency. Or if you feel the need to wash down your food, you're probably not chewing enough. So chewing your food not only helps with your nervous system response because you're really paying attention to tasting and even feeling the texture of your food before you swallow it, and that's a way to get you into that parasympathetic response. But you're also allowing the digestive enzymes to do what they need to do in your mouth. So chewing your food adequately is an important part of digestion. Turning off screens and multitasking. So like what we talked about earlier, um, keeping it lighthearted. So if you really need something to do while you're eating, especially if you're not eating with other people, making sure that you're choosing lighthearted books to read or whatever it is that you're doing while you're eating. Let's try to stay away from things like social media, which tend to activate like comparison and that sympathetic nervous response, news, or other intense kind of activities. Just try to keep it real lighthearted. Minimizing non-caloric beverages with your meal. So this isn't black and white. This is just play around with it and do what's best for you. But what I recommend to clients typically is giving yourself a 30-minute window before and after you eat for non-caloric beverages, because the goal here is we don't want to dilute your stomach acid. So the less we dilute that stomach acid and those enzymes, the more effective they will be at breaking down your food. So I'm not saying don't drink, but really try to keep it to a minimum when you can. And then after you take your last bite, don't jump right up and get back to the next thing. Your food's going to be in your stomach for hours. So let that sit for a minute. Let your digestion continue to like kind of work on it and say, okay, this is what we have. Are we full? Are we not full? And give it a few more minutes before you just jump up and go on to the next thing. All right. I'm going to take a water break, but I see someone else joined. Amanda, if you have questions throughout, just please feel free to unmute yourself. You can put yourself on video. I'd love to see your face if you feel up to it. Or you can throw your questions in the chat. I'm just going to take a quick drink here. Okay, let's move along. Got a little bit of time left. So, blood sugar regulation. Blood sugar levels are regulated by the adrenal glands, impacting sleep, stress, and mood. So these are an important factor in your mental health. So if you have ever been hangry, I'd ask you to raise your hand, but I can't see either of you right now. So, but I mean, throw it in the chat. If you've ever been hangry or know what that is, like give me a holler. We tend to kind of laugh it off like, oh my gosh, I'm hangry. And it's because we're irritable, we're losing focus, we're shaky, we're kind of trembling, we can't think right. Sometimes we have a headache, we're snapping at people. And we kind of joke about how it's due to being hangry. In fact, I almost ruined my engagement, my husband's proposal to me because I was hangry. That was back in the days when I had a lot of blood sugar issues. So yeah, but it is a stress response. That shaky feeling that you get is your adrenaline going. We tend to get excessively hungry, and it's because we're in a stress response. So our body's preparing to create energy. And so we really need, it says we have low blood sugar, we need food right now. So it increases things like ghrelin to try to get us to eat. Um, so this is a stress response, but the reason that hangry happens is because we have a rapid drop in glucose. That's typically what happens when we are hangry. So in a healthy blood sugar response, we're going to kind of remain steady throughout the day. And when we get hungry, we're going to feel hungry, but we're not going to feel hangry. That is a healthy or a healthy stress response, but a healthy blood sugar response. But that hangry feeling tends to come when we have poor blood sugar regulation, whether it's due to a high carbohydrate diet, whether it's due to a lot of processed foods, whether it's due to insulin resistance, whether it's due to adrenal insufficiency. Any of these components and any combination of those components can be the factor in why you would get hangry versus just being hungry. So here's a great diagram of what it looks like when we have unhealthy blood sugar balance. So blood sugar imbalance is this roller coaster. We shouldn't be doing this up and down things, but this is kind of how a typical People who come to see me are typically are going to be looking like this or something like this. They get this, they wake up, first thing they need is a cup of coffee, or they might grab like an apple, or they might grab like a piece of toast for breakfast. Insulin or glucose and insulin rise, and then they just drop really rapidly because what we didn't have was fat or protein or green vegetables. We instantly started that cortisol response by drinking caffeine first thing in the morning, things like that. And that happens just throughout the day. We get these highs and then we crash, and we get these highs and then we crash, and we get these highs and then we crash. And if you relate to that, then this is something that we definitely need to be talking about. And in fact, I would say this is where um, my rebalance course would be really helpful. I will put a link to that in your wrap up email as well. That actually starts on Tuesday. So sign up is going to end pretty quickly here. So I'm going to put that in the wrap up email for you if that's something that interests you. But in the meantime, just have this picture in your mind. This is what it looks like to have unhealthy sugar balance and sugar response. All right. So ways to support blood sugar balance. If adrenals are not really a factor, what we want to do is choose whole or minimally processed foods as much as possible. Focus on quality proteins, fats, and vegetables. Whole grains, fruits, or starches should be eaten less frequently. So those are not bad foods. There's a lot of nutrients provided in those, but when we're eating them out of balance with these other components, it has a big effect on our blood sugar levels. So examples of quality proteins are going to be pasture-raised poultry, eggs, light and dark meats, grass-fed beef, pork from rooting pigs, cold water caught fish, wild caught seafood, quinoa, lentils, grass-fed dairy products, nuts, seeds, high protein vegetables such as broccoli, asparagus, Brussels sprouts, and artichokes. There's a lot more to say about protein in regards to what we already discussed with the amino acids. I will provide a link to a resource where I have broken down different types of proteins and really educate you on what kinds of proteins we need to be getting on a daily basis in our diet. I'll include that as well because that's a little too complex to be discussing in the next 15 minutes or so. I'll make a note to myself to send you guys that. Examples of quality fats are going to be olive, extra virgin olive oil, unrefined coconut oil, nuts, seeds, butters, grass-fed full-fat dairy, avocados, egg yolks, sardines. Those are all very good quality types of fat and provide those fatty acids that help support blood sugar. Using the mindful eating techniques, so the things we talked about before, the breathing techniques, the sitting down to eat, the avoiding beverages, and the chewing your food, that's all considered mindful eating. Adaptogenic herbs to support the adrenal glands and stress response. I have a favorite product for this because many of my clients do deal with adrenal insufficiency. So this is commonly something that I recommend. And I actually take it myself. So I'll include that in the supplements that I put in your wrap-up email for you. Again, there's a lot of details we could be talking about, and if you have questions, I'm happy to answer those. But I've chosen to not go over each individual product while we're in the webinar because there's so much more to discuss. Intermittent fasting techniques to improve insulin sensitivity. There's a lot of really great research around this. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of misinformation about how to do it and what it is. So it's a good idea to be working with a practitioner when you decide to do something like this. But if you find that you have blood sugar issues that are not improving with diet, it might be useful for you to undergo an intermittent fasting or an alternate day fasting routine to improve those insulin sensitivity levels. Food flexibility is another big part of mental health. In our culture, we're very heavily mediatized. There's a lot of health claims and information out there. A lot of it comes from sources that are not well educated, not well researched. Different opinions affect different things. And so it can be difficult to know who to trust and what sources we should be valuing. And what that kind of does is it causes us to maybe compare ourselves or to get really anxious about what kinds of foods we're eating. And we tend to fear foods that we call bad foods, or we get anxious around not having the choice of what foods to eat. So, this food flexibility is a really important factor that I believe is worth considering when we're talking about nutrition and mental health. So, this is not an exclusive list. You don't have to have an eating disorder to exhibit disordered eating behaviors. They're two different things. Um, but a lot of times, what I see in clients are going to be signs of disordered eating behavior. So, ignoring signs and symptoms for the sake of sticking with a diet, experiencing anxiety around foods that are not good, labeling foods as good or bad, the tendency or desire to binge eat after following rigid rules for, let's say you go all week and you're like, I get to splurge on the weekends. That's a sign of disordered eating behavior. Calorie tracking um, is can be considered a disordered eating behavior, and checking your weight daily or even multiple times a day can be disordered eating behaviors. Now, like I said, those are not mutually exclusive to disordered eating behaviors. There can be healthful reasons to do some of those things. However, for the most part, this is how I see them, is that they're disordered eating behaviors because they're not components of health. And it creates this fear and anxiety around our relationship with food and our relationship with our body. We're not trusting our bodies to tell us what they need. So, creating food flexibility is a process that involves learning and understanding your own body's unique health needs, learning to recognize and trust your body's cues for support, and addressing those cues can be a slow process. Over time, addressing your symptoms enables you to support your health in a way that allows for room and flexibility without feeling fear, shame, guilt, or causing symptoms. So, what we're trying to do is create a healthy system that enables you to be able to choose the piece of cake or the thing that we would consider maybe unhealthy, or if we're on a road trip and we're eating fast food, we don't want to have anxiety around that or fear it, because what we need in that moment is nourishment. And we can those foods can be enjoyable. So what we want to avoid is that anxiety and fear around those foods and have a better relationship with those. We can support health in a way that enables that flexibility without having to fear it or worry about the repercussions. I want to open this up for any thoughts or questions so far. You can throw them in the chat. We've got about 13 minutes left, so I'm going to get to a Q&A in just a minute here, but any thoughts on what I just said? Very helpful. Good. I'm glad. I'm very glad that you're finding this helpful. Um, so putting the pieces together, amino acids are essential to neurotransmitter production. Digestive health impacts your body's ability to absorb nutrients and protects against pathogens that disrupt neurotransmitter pathways. Poor blood sugar management is a sign of adrenal insufficiency and insulin resistance and can impact stress, mood, and pain levels. We didn't talk much about pain. Pain is also, or tissue integrity is also maintained by the adrenal glands. Um, so we didn't talk a lot about pain, but pain can also affect mental health. People who are in chronic pain, that may be one of you who's here, are heavily impacted by mental health. It can be exhausting, it can be isolating, um, and just outright draining. Disordered eating behaviors can be as subtle as labeling foods good or bad. So those are kind of putting some of our main points together. Anything coming up for both of you? You're welcome to unmute yourself and speak up, put it in the chat. You can also scan this code to just drop me a quick email. You can also hit reply to the reminder emails that you got for the webinar, and that will come directly to me. Good question. So Amanda asked, what about avoiding certain foods associated with anxiety or panic attacks? For example, chocolate, caffeine, etc. That's a good question. I can't remember if you were in on this or this part of the conversation or not, but things like chocolate, caffeine, those types of stimulants, what they do is they stimulate our adrenal glands into producing cortisol levels. So you're right, they can be associated with higher anxiety. So yeah, that if you deal with anxiety, those could be good things to avoid those um, stimulating foods. However, I would say there is also an individual component to that. So for some people, for instance, with food sensitivities, those foods are going to look different for every person. So I have some food sensitivities that really cause my heart to race, and they cause that increased stress response, but that's specific to me. So that's a really great question. I would say, in general, if you deal with anxiety, avoiding those types of foods would be beneficial to you. What else is coming up for you guys? All right. So let's close this out. I really appreciate you guys being here. I love talking about nutrition and mental health. I do believe that it's an overlooked piece of mental health. But in the beginning, I said that this is not a cure-all for anxiety, mental illness. Other types of supports are commonly necessary to heal from mental illness and to um, navigate the complexities and the individuality of it. As a therapy goer myself, and I've used a number of different modalities to help with my mental wellness. But as a nutrition expert, this is where I get to this is where it's within my scope, and this is what I get to talk about is the nutritional component of addressing mental wellness. So, pardon me if there's no more. I love that you'll get to see that in the replay. Um, if there's no more comments or questions, I'm gonna just let you guys go a few minutes early. And you'll get a follow-up email from me tonight or tomorrow with a replay of the whole webinar and the other resources that we mentioned. Very nice, Marjorie. Thanks for showing up. I appreciate it. All right, thanks, Amanda. You just have a great night.